overview would be good. Maybe we can start with, from the beginning. When we call you to schedule a well inspection, start with that process, things that we need to know, what you're looking for, how long does it take for that process to return? Are there any considerations we need to think about when scheduling a well inspection and the results of those tests and the time period of the inspection itself?
Okay. So normally that's not an issue. We can get, we get so just kind of an overview on the whole well inspection thing. So when you call and need a well inspection, normally we can get that scheduled within like a day or two of calling. We can usually rearrange schedule or get you in within a day or two, and definitely within the time, the 10-day time period. And a lot of people will call us last minute because they didn't know they had to have a well inspection until the day before their closing. So we can usually squeeze that in and get that done for you. Obviously, the most amount of time notice that we can get, the better, so we can schedule it. But so when we do the well test, we're going to measure the depth of the water in the well, check out all the equipment, make sure it's working properly, and get a production rate for the well, which normally is in gallons per minute, maybe a gallon per minute. A really good well might be 4 or 5 gallons per minute. A marginal well, one that'll run a house, is half a gallon a minute. So anywhere in that range, we'll test it and see what it is and how much the well's producing. And then we'll also take a water sample and have that tested for total coliform and E. coli. And the turnaround on that is 24 hours. So we'll take the sample when we're doing the well test, and then we'll have those results the next day available to you. So as far as scheduling and time frame, that's kind of where we're at on that, and kind of what we do for the well inspection.
Great. That's a quick turnaround. That's quicker than what we can get most inspections done. And so thanks. When we're looking at coliform and E. coli, do we see, everything from, do we see more certain times of the years when those, the bacteria and things are going to exist more in the water?
Yes. And especially out in the Baderville area, the Fort Valley, Baderville area, in the springtime with the snow melt, a lot of times that snow melts and it goes down to the ground so fast, it washes a bunch of stuff from the surface down into the water. So occasionally we'll get hits with total coliform, and occasionally, not many, but every once in a while we will get an E. coli hit out in Fort Valley. But that's really the only place that we have an issue with that. And that's usually just in the springtime during the spring thaw when that's an issue.
Is that because of, would it be related to the septic systems that are out there by chance?
So it's part of it is the septic systems, and part of it is some of those older wells that were drilled back in the 60s and 70s. They weren't drilled to the same standards that we use today. They didn't have a grout seal in them in the top 20 feet. And so a lot of times you'll get surface water that will actually run down the well and into the well. And so that can wash anything from the surface down into the well also. And so that can cause issues with those wells out there. There are a few wells that have that problem out in that Fort Valley area. But that's really the only place that we have an issue with it. As far as geographically in Flagstaff, where there are wells, is obviously the Fort Valley, Baderville area. There's a lot of wells out there. Lockett Ranches, all those houses are on wells up in Lockett Ranches. Eldon Lookout Road, Schultz Pass, Eldon Lookout Road, all those houses out there are on wells. And then the parks, the Parks area, there's a lot of wells out in Parks. Garland Prairie, kind of out that way, out that direction. And then there are a lot of shallow wells in, Pittman Valley, out in that area. There's a lot of wells there too. But other than that, there's really not a lot of wells east of town. The water's just really deep out there. It's like 1,400 feet deep on the east side of town. So you don't see a lot of private wells out that direction.
Great. And where do we see, I know for a while, a few years ago, it's not knowledge to me now, but there used to be some issues with some of the wells out in Parks because the water there just wasn't enough of a supply out there. We've seen a shortage of supply in some areas. Are people having to draw in deeper? I know that we have a watershed problem just in general that, for
Parks,
instance,
Flagstaff in general just doesn't have a lot of groundwater, compared to other areas, but Parks in particular, the water is just really spotty out there. It's just hit and miss. There's a lot of places like I tell people, we'll drill a well on one lot and then we'll move across the street. We'll get water on one lot, we'll move across the street and drill, and it's a dry well. So It's just Parks is just really spotty. There's just obviously no guarantee of water out in that area.
How about cleanliness? You know, a lot of buyers will call and ask, and they're hesitant about wells. They don't know enough about it, or they've had a bad experience with this. So, well, which is the more clean, safest water versus Donny, City, Belmont, or well water? How do they compare, or would you know?
Well, it kind of depends on what what you want. City water is obviously chlorinated, fluorinated, treated, and all that other stuff, and it tastes like it. You know, you get a lot of taste from that, but it is what they would consider cleaner or safer because it's been treated so much. Donny Park water is the same way. They chlorinate, treat all that water. Belmont, the same thing. When you have a well, you're just taking water straight out of the ground. So it isn't treated. It doesn't have the chlorine. It doesn't have all the other stuff from it. So, so as far as clean, it kind of depends on what you're looking for.
Do you recommend people in some of the rural areas with their own individual wells, shared or private, to put in some type of filtration system as part of the well?
Normally not, because your filtration system is not going to take care of the bacteria. The only way to treat bacteria is to chlorinate the water. And so if you're chlorinating your water, then you have all the issues of chlorinating. You've got the byproducts and the filtration. So unless you're going to go all out with some kind of chlorination system, all I recommend with people is if they are getting any kind of sediment or any kind of material in their house from the well, then you can put in a whole house filter that will take care of the sediment. But as far as treating the water, it doesn't really treat the water. It just filters out any, like I said, any sediment or any material that might be coming in. So I normally don't even recommend it unless they need it to put in a filter.
And so we're seeing, back to one of the questions, just to get clarification, are we seeing water levels drop as more people are kind of pulling and we're continuing to have more drought weather? Are you seeing any concerns, or is the water dropping? Is that just a misconception?
Yeah, I think it's a misconception because most of the shallow wells in Flagstaff are all direct results of the snow melt on the peaks. So the years that we have good snow melt and we have good snow and the wells all get replenished. So it's really a matter of the weather and the drought than the number of people that are using the well or they're putting in wells. I think it's just a matter of the weather more than anything with that.
And how deep is the typical well in Baderville and some of those other areas if we're advising our clients to?
Yeah, almost everywhere it's 200 to 250 feet. That's, Baderville, Lockett, Eldon Lookout. There are some deeper wells on Eldon Lookout Road. You may have to go down 300 feet there. Parks is the same thing. 200 to 250 feet is kind of the normal depth on a well.
And do we advise people if they're doing new construction to maybe go deeper just as a precautionary for long term?
Not really. It doesn't really help to go deeper. There's one layer of water that you pick up, and either the water's there or it's not. So going deeper doesn't really help. Like when we drill a well, we'll normally recommend you go 100 feet below the water, so you have plenty of storage in the well. If the water level does drop some, you've still got room in there. So normally we recommend going about 100 feet below the water level, and they can tell that when they're drilling. Like as you're drilling the well, you can tell when you hit water. So normally you'll go about 100 feet below that, which puts us in the 200 to 250 range almost everywhere.
How does the process of determining where well water is going to be? So for like a lot, somebody was telling me that there's somebody that you can hire that uses the old method of a stick, some type of a stick that can kind of lead you to water.
So the dowsing, like the dowsing, there are people who will do that, that will douse the well. That's kind of one of those things, like if you believe in it, you think it works, then it probably does. If you have your doubts, then you can, it's one of those things you can find evidence to prove, yeah, it works or it doesn't work, whatever you're looking for. So, I mean, I've seen, let me just put it this way. I haven't seen enough evidence that it works that I would spend the money to hire somebody to come do it. But that's just, that's just me. So, but there are a lot of people that believe in it and think that it works. And so I tell them, well, you guys, pretty much what I tell the owner is we'll put the well wherever you want it. The chances of getting water on a 1 acre or 2 acre lot probably there's not that much difference anywhere on the lot that's going to make much difference where you put the well. What we found more and more is because of the septics, the complexity of the septic systems, and where they have to be in floodplain issues and all the rest of that. The septic needs to be the first thing that gets planned out on a lot. Figure out where the septic is going, figure out where your house is going. And then, the well has to be 100 feet from any part of the septic. So by the time you plan out your septic, plan out where the house is going, you're pretty limited on the lot on where you can actually put the well.
Sure. And what is your method for determining where the water is going to be? How does, if we send a client your way, and where do you go from there to determine?
What we'll do is we'll just look at all the lots that are around it and the 30 years experience that I have up here in Flagstaff. I can pretty much tell you where there's water and where there's not at this point, just because we've done so many wells up here and I know where all the wells are. But normally we'll look at the lots around it, because if you have wells all around a lot, then chances are you're going to get water on that lot, However, if there's a lot of dry wells around that lot, then you're probably going to not get a well on that lot either. So it's pretty much just kind of experience and knowing the area and looking at the other wells in the area.
And what about the differences between shared versus a private well?
So in my experience, most of the shared wells have worked fine. As long as the well produces enough water to supply water to the houses, the shared well seems to work fine. A lot of times, people just set up a homeowners association for the well, and, one person's kind of responsible for taking care of stuff. And it definitely cuts down on the cost and, the cost of repairs, the cost of maintenance, the cost of putting in the well. And most of them seem to work fine.
Concerns with too many people drawing and lack of gallons per minute in a shared situation?
Yeah. So basically, when we drill the well, we'll know how much water the well's producing and can kind of tell the owner. Yeah. There's definitely been, owners that call and they want to put 10 houses in on a well, and the well's not going to make enough water to do that. So, the option is you drill 2 or 3 wells and tie them all in, or each house gets its own well, or, something like that. There's other options. There are very few places in Flagstaff where you can drill a shallow well that makes enough water to run, more than 3 or 4 houses. So.
And what determines gallons per minute exactly?
It's pretty much like as you're drilling the well, the water, kind of the layer of water, because in Flagstaff, we've got all these volcanics, from the mountains. So you'll have a layer of rock and then a layer of cinders and another layer of rock. And that water just kind of runs in those layers of cinders. And so depending on how thick that layer is, how well connected that layer is to the general water supply, all that stuff kind of factors into it. I think what you get out in Baderville is that whole valley just kind of fills up with water from the snow melt. So you have some wells that make, a lot of water out there. And then there are some places where there's no water. So just kind of depends on the area out there.
Okay. And am I correct in thinking that most of our water hangs out in the Coconino Sandstone?
So that's what we call the regional aquifers, the Coconino Sandstone. So that's the city pulls all of its water out of the Coconino, but in most places in Flagstaff, the Coconino is down almost 2,000 feet. Mm-hmm. So very few. There are wells. There's 4 deep wells up in Lockett that pull out of the Coconino aquifer, but most people, a well like that nowadays is going to cost you close to $250,000. So most people don't have the money to drill that kind of well down to the Coconino aquifer unless it's a shared well. Most of the shallow wells, the 250 foot wells, are just in the volcanics, so they're not pulling out of the Coconino aquifer.
Okay. And what is the cost, from something that's fairly easy to put in to something that's more difficult, and explain what determines the difficulty?
So if it's just a single well for a single home that's in the 250 foot range, to do the well, the pumps, the cistern, all the hookups, everything you'll need, you're in about the $25,000 range to do that. That's like your single home shallow well out in Fort Valley, Lockett, Eldon Lookout Road. You're in that $25,000 range. To do a deep well, 2,000 feet, where you're in the Coconino aquifer and you're going to share it between 12, 13 houses. You're in the $250,000 range to do that. So, if you had 12 houses, then each house would be about, in that $25,000 range to do it. So, But yeah, those deep wells now are close to $250,000 to do one of those.
And how long does it typically take for both of those to be installed?
So the well drilling itself is just a few days. You get on, it takes a couple of weeks to get permits, you get on the schedule. It takes a couple of, 2 or 3 days to drill the well. The complete process, I mean, if we had a home where we could just go in and do all the work in a week, we'd have, water finished. But most of the time, especially with new construction, we have to go put the well and the tank in at the beginning. Then we have to wait for, rough in on the house to do our stuff. And then towards the end, we go do the final hookup. So, it's usually not till the end of the project till we come in and do our final hookup and get the water actually running.
But the well gets installed first before the house, if that's correct.
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah, most of the time they want to come in and drill the well first and get that in before they start the house. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Kind of with the septic too, the same way. You start the septic, and I mean, any more septics, it takes quite a while to get those in and finished. But we kind of work along the same time frame as the septic system. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, we have a few questions. I'm going to go ahead and open those up, and let's see. So Helen, you have, how is that remedied? So we might have skipped over. That was one of our first questions. If you could go ahead and put it back in the chat box, specifically what you're asking, how it's remedied, please. And then Paula says, hi, David, do you also drill wells? What areas would most likely be successful in drilling a well? What can a home buyer do if their well has too many coliforms? So I think we did talk about how you drill wells. If there's anything you want to add to that, David, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't personally do the drilling, but we work with a driller here in town. Right now we work with Barbie Drilling, and he drills the wells. And then after he's done, we come in and install the pumps and the tanks and everything. So we actually, I mean, we don't do it ourselves, but we work with a driller to make sure it's kind of a complete package. So yeah, if they just contact us, contact our office, we can get estimates out and get them in contact with the driller and get everything arranged through our office to get that done. And as far as, I can't remember, the rest of the question was kind of where
yeah, sorry. What areas would most likely be successful in drilling a well?
Yeah.
What areas are most successful?
Pretty much the only areas in Flagstaff are going to be the Fort Valley area, Lockett Ranches, along Eldon Lookout Road, parks, and then south of town, down by Munns Park and down in that area, there's wells down there too.
Great. And then what? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I was going to say that there's a lot of land that's kind of opening up out behind Fort Tuthill. And we've drilled wells out there. The water out there is about 1,400 feet out behind Fort Tuthill. And so to put in a system out there, you're at about $150,000 to do that. So that's kind of, again, that's kind of a shared well situation out there.
Due to the depth, correct?
Yeah, because of the depth. Yeah, but the wells do make a lot of water out there because you are drilling into the Coconino aquifer. And so those wells, you can expect 15 to 16 gallons a minute from those wells, which is more than enough to run 14 houses. And just one other thing, with clients that are looking to develop and do land like that, you can only have 14 hookups on a private well. Anything over 14, it becomes a utility, and then it's subject to DEQ testing, and it becomes a water company. So if you do have people that are looking at doing a shared well, you just have to remember that 14 is kind of the magic number. If you stay under 14, you can keep it a private well. It doesn't have to be tested or reported or anything. If you go over the 14, then you become a water utility, and you have to do all the DEQ testing, and then it becomes kind of a big deal. So that's something to keep in mind if you do have developers that are looking at putting in a well.
Is that a benefit to the owners that are living out there as far as having more regulation or testing done?
No, I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's just a huge pain in the neck to have to go through all that because that water's coming out of the Coconino sandstone. There's no, I mean, that's good water. There's no issues with any of that. So, if anybody does have an issue, they can test it themselves. Have the lab test the water. If they do have any concerns, and they can deal with it privately. But once you become a utility, you're subject to all kinds of regulations and testing, and it just becomes a big hassle. So I would definitely not recommend that if they can help it, because we've got 2 or 3 communities that are trying to make that transition, and it's a huge pain to do that, and they're really expensive too.
Okay, good to know. And then her last question was, what can a home buyer do if their well has too many coliforms? Is that going back to the chlorine?
Yeah, you do. So most of the time, most of the houses are pumping into a cistern. So you can always chlorinate the cistern because the chlorine will kill any of the bacteria that's in there. The other thing we can do is we can actually have the lab do a quantitative number on the coliform to see, where the level's at. And if it's super low, a lot of times we won't worry about it. If you have a high coliform level, or if you have any E. coli at all, then you're kind of into the chlorinating and filtering. So we can do it. I mean, if it's an issue, we can definitely, and we don't even have to chlorinate it. We can put a UV sterilizer and filtration and everything and treat that water.
That's what I was going to ask. There's an alternative to chlorine, a safer alternative.
We can do a UV filter. UV filter will disinfect or it neutralizes the bacteria. So yeah, if they do have an issue with high coliform or E. coli, a good filtration and UV sterilizer will take care of that.
And how much does that typically run in addition to?
I think we're in the $1,500 to $1,800 range for the equipment and installation and everything. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. That's so. Somebody told me once that they would just every once in a while pour a gallon of bleach down into their cistern.
Yeah, because a lot of times, the cisterns are open to the air. They have a vent so air can go in and out. And so what you get is there's bacteria in the air. So bacteria goes into the tank and then it kind of starts growing in the tank. So once a month you go out and you put about a cup of bleach into a normal cistern, and that'll kill any bacteria that's in there. And then that'll keep it from, building up again. So yeah, that's definitely another option. If it's not, if you're not getting a lot of bacteria from the well, if it's just kind of growing in the tank because of open to the atmosphere, then yeah, a cup of bleach every month will eliminate that.
Okay. It sounds incredibly toxic, but I'll take your word for it.
A cup of bleach. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you're putting a cup of bleach in 2,500 gallons of water, so it gets diluted pretty well. And that's just enough to kill the bacteria, but not. And so this is what I tell most of my customers. When we do the kit test and it comes back positive for total coliform, which is bacteria, but it's negative for E. coli, we know there's not any surface water. We know there's not septic tank water getting into the well. And I tell people I would rather live with the small amount of bacteria that you're getting in the tank than the chlorine and the byproducts of chlorine. So.
Oh, you went on mute there, Dave.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so that's kind of, and like I said, we can also test for it and find out the level of chlorine, because when we do a normal pass-fail coliform test, like if there's if there's 1 part per million of coliform, then it comes back positive. But 1 or 2 parts per million of coliform, you breathe more than that just in the air. So, it kind of depends on the level of coliform too, as to what, what's safe or not safe, I guess, to put it.
So where does the unsafe level of coliform parts per million?
I would say, like, if you're getting over like 10 or 12 parts per million, then it's probably an issue that you might want to address. Anything lower than that, I'd say that's just pretty much normal background bacteria, not anything like I would worry about it personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. And then how often do you recommend we get a well inspection?
Oh, I would definitely get a well inspection every time that there's a transaction, because you want the buyers to know if there's an issue, first of all, and second of all, to make sure the well is going to make enough water to supply their needs. So I would definitely, anytime there's a transaction, I would definitely recommend a well inspection to make sure that they know what they're getting.
And maybe as far as testing, how much should one be testing? Once every 3 months or so?
I would say every 6 months at the most. If there's an issue or there's a concern, then you could do it more often. But if they're just like trying to make sure that there's not a problem, then every 6 months or, would probably be more than enough to test.
Is there any type of tool that you can just put into your well that would automatically alert you if it all of a sudden had high coliform, so you could catch it at the onset?
No, unfortunately, there's nothing like that.
All right. Well, there you go. There's your retirement plan right there.
Yeah, there you go. Invent something that'll monitor the chloroform level. Yeah. No, the only thing I know of is you just take a sample into the lab and they run it, because, yeah, that's the only thing I know of.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
Paula also asked if you use dowsers when you drill a well, and he said he did not, Paula. So hopefully we answered that for you twice.
Yeah.
And then,
I don't, but like I said, if there's somebody that wants it done, I can definitely put them in touch with somebody that can do it. I just personally don't do it. And the driller, and actually the driller that we use, his driller does dowsing. And so normally they just do it as part of their kind of routine. When they show up on the job site, he kind of walks around with his rods and tries to pick out the best spot. So it's kind of something that they kind of do anyway.
yeah. And then you might have already answered this, but in regards to heavy metals, chemicals, other than maybe the bacteria that you suggested, it's all just kind of based on where it's at and level of comfort testing for heavy metals.
So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to mention that. So just to keep in mind that FHA and VA loans do require a lot more testing. And it's a lot more money. It's about, I think it adds about $250 to the cost because we do have to measure for heavy metals, nitrates, arsenic, lead, all that stuff. So if it's an FHA or VA loan, number one, you have to keep in mind there's additional costs for the testing, but also it takes 2 weeks to process those samples. So if you have an FHA or a VA, you need to either make sure you get the samples done right away so we can get the results back in time, or allow for extra time for those 2 weeks for the turnaround on the samples. All of the shallow wells that we've tested in Flagstaff have never tested for arsenic or lead or any of the heavy metals or any of the nitrates or anything, just because it's such fresh water. It's the snow melt comes down and it doesn't have time to absorb a lot of that stuff from the geology. Some of the wells in the Coconino aquifer will test higher for the arsenic. So any of those deeper wells in the Coconino, you have to look at that and see what the arsenic level is, because some of them will test high for arsenic.
Do you know how our water in Flagstaff originally is quality-wise compared to some other mountain towns?
The city water is pretty high quality. Most of the city water comes from wells in the Coconino Sandstone, Coconino Aquifer, and it's supplemented with Lake Mary surface water. So Flagstaff actually has pretty good city water. It's pretty high quality compared to a lot of places. The well water in Flagstaff is really high quality. We're fortunate that we have really good well water in the places that we do have well water.
Awesome. And then you might have answered this already, the average depth of a shallow well and a deep well. I think we touched on that already, but if you could remind us.
Yeah, 200. So plan on 200 to 250 for a shallow well in pretty much all the areas around Flagstaff. The deep well, if you go east of town, you're in the 1,400 to 1,600 foot range. If you go south of town, you're in that 1,400 foot range. The Fort Tuthill area is about 1,400 feet. When you go north of town, it gets a lot deeper and you're down almost 2,000 feet on the north end of town.
Sweet, thanks.
Yep.
And then when you find contamination in a well, what is the remedy? I believe we talked about throwing a cup of bleach in a 2,500 gallon cistern and using the UV filter. So if there's anything else to add on that.
Yeah, no, that's really the only thing, especially if it's coming from the well itself, then, yeah, pretty much the UV filter and chlorinating are the only two options.
Great, thank you. There you go, Helen. And Michael Dugan says, how can you use timers and cisterns with float systems to mitigate a marginal well to make it produce consistently?
Yeah, so what we do on the wells that are marginal, so whenever we have a cistern, there's a float switch in the cistern that when the float gets full, it shuts the well off. And then when it drops down about 1.5 feet, it turns the well back on again. And then the controller for the well itself has what we call dry run protection. Basically what happens is the pump comes on, pumps all the water out of the well. This controller, senses that the well's out of water, shuts the pump off and lets it sit for usually a half hour for the well to fill back up. And then it automatically comes back on and pumps that water out. So it's, as long as the tank is calling for water, every half hour it's cycling and pumping, whatever the well makes. Let's say the well produces half a gallon a minute. The pump sits for 30 minutes, then 15 gallons will accumulate in the well. the pump comes on and pumps that 15 gallons into the tank, and it just does that constantly until the tank gets full. So that's how we deal with the marginal wells, is we actually have controllers and with timers and all that take care of that.
Great, thank you. Paula asked, what about Happy Valley and Mormon Lake area, wells in those areas?
Yes, Happy Valley.
Do you mean Happy Jack by chance? Happy Valley is in Phoenix, Paula. Or
Yeah.
go ahead to Happy Valley.
Well, there's Happy Trails. So there's Happy Trails that's like behind Lower Lake Mary.
Could be it, but what about Mormon Lake and kind of that general area? I know my parents live in a well in Happy Jack.
Yeah, Happy Jack. So the water in Happy Jack is about 600 feet. So it's kind of in that middle range. So yeah, you're going to spend a little bit more on a well, but it's down in the Happy Jack area. The Mormon Lake area, it's the same thing. There are some places where there's really shallow water where you can do a 100-foot well, but most of those wells are 200 feet in the Mormon Lake area. At the Lake Mary, so around Lake Mary, you're in about the 600-foot range around Lake Mary too. And that's only because the city has the Lake Mary well field, and they've pumped a lot of water out and lowered the water level in that area. So in the Lake Mary area, you're about 600 feet to water now.
Okay. And then Victoria says, please, what about radon? That's a good question. Do we have to worry about radon? We know it's in the ground. Does it percolate to the water?
Radon is not a water issue. Radon is a gas that, it's a gas that accumulates. It's a radioactive gas that accumulates in the air, especially in your crawl spaces and inside your house. It's not something that's present in water. So yeah, it's not radon in water is not an issue.
Great. Okay, good question. And then I think we answered this as well, Lori, but we'll just make sure if there's anything to touch on it. For homeowners, how often should wells be checked out?
So if there's a concern as far as water quality, and this is something the homeowner can do themselves, they go to it's Western Technologies. Their lab is called Nortest, and they give them anybody can go in. They give them a sample bottle. They go home, they fill up the sample bottle, and take it back to the lab. So that's something that the homeowner can do anytime they want. As far as the well itself goes, like the systems that we put in are maintenance free. There's nothing that has to be done. As long as everything's working, then you just leave everything working. And when something breaks or something quits working, then we come in and fix it. So there's no maintenance, other than the filters. If we do put filters in, then, obviously there's some maintenance associated with the filter. But as far as the pump and the pumping equipment, there's no maintenance that's done on them. They either work or they don't work, and when they quit working, we come fix it. So.
All right. And Patrick Conley, I don't know if we have a question, but he says he has a shared well at 1,826 feet with water at 1,550. Is in Schnebly Hill Formation and produced 20 gallons per minute 30 years ago. And then he follows up with, I have 2 other holes at 350 and 1,100 on my 2 acres. What is involved in abandoning a well? What would go into a hole where the driller lost his tool at 11 feet? So I'm wondering if those are all related, Patrick. Not sure how you want to answer that, David.
Yeah. But we are seeing more and more issues with abandoning wells because people are buying property that had an old well on it, and they need to put the septic system in where the old well is. Unfortunately, the requirements with DEQ are really nebulous on abandoning wells. And so I've just pretty much avoided the issue because the permitting to get wells abandoned, and it's just like people want an estimate, and it's like I can't give them an estimate because you have to go do a lot of testing on the well, and then you have to go back to DEQ, and then they tell you how you need to abandon it. If it's only 11 feet deep, then you pretty much don't have to do anything with it. But if it is an issue with the septic system, then a lot of times what we have to do is come back and fill the well with either concrete or some material and cap it. It's kind of a complicated process to abandon a well if you do it according to regulations. If you just have like Patrick was saying, a 300 or 11 foot, 100-foot well or 11-foot well or something. I mean, if you have to move it, then you can move it. If you don't have to, I wouldn't go through the process of abandoning it.
Are there issues environmentally with abandoned wells?
Not up here. So the issues with abandoned wells, the reason it's an issue is if you have a well that penetrates a contaminated aquifer, and this is more for like Phoenix where they have, problems with issues with contaminated aquifers. If you have a well that penetrates a contaminated aquifer and then it goes down into a clean aquifer, it will actually transfer the contamination from one aquifer to the next. So then you do have to go in and abandon these wells according to, all these regulations that DEQ has. If you just have a well that was dry, that was drilled on your property and it doesn't penetrate an aquifer and there's nothing going on with it, you can pretty much just fill it up with dirt, dig down a foot, cut the steel casing off, weld a cap on it, and you're good.
Okay, you went back on mute there, David. Your hand must be keep touching it. Great. And there, Judy has put in, because our next question was, Michael had requested your contact information. So there you go.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
David Stevens is our well guy here. And let's see, going down, any information you could provide on use of the pump. Is it best not to, okay, you guys keep moving it. Is it best not to pump several times a day or does it matter?
It doesn't matter. When we set these pumps up, or if you're setting your own pump up, they recommend that you have a minimum half hour cool off time for the pump. So if the pump comes on and runs, when you shut it off, you want to let it sit for at least a half hour, and that dissipates the heat that builds up in the pump. If it's cycling too often, the motor gets hot and it'll burn up. So you don't want it cycling more than about every half hour. But other than that, it won't hurt the pump at all. To set it on that half hour timer where it comes on, pumps the well dry, sits for a half hour, automatically comes on again. So it doesn't hurt the pumps at all to come on multiple times per day. And really, that's the only way to do it with a well that doesn't produce a lot of water. You have to set it up on a timer like that where it just cycles on and off during the day.
Sure. Okay. And Michelle Oman asked, do you know anything about wells in Happy Jack? I know you touched on that, but she also asked Payson. And what should buyers be looking for, asking, etc., with regard to the well on a purchase? It's a good question.
Yeah, so that whole like the Happy Jack Payson area, and I'm not super familiar with Payson because there are other contractors in that area that work that area. But I think that Payson area is kind of in the same 600 to 800 feet depth. As the Happy Jack is about 600 feet. But it's the same. The wells make good water there. A lot of times we can run it. You don't need a cistern. The well makes enough water. You can just run it straight to the house down in that area. And I'm sorry, what was the rest of the question?
What should buyers be looking for, asking for, etc., with a well on a purchase?
Yeah, so especially down. So the main thing is, like, what I tell them is just, find out where the property is located. They can call me and I can give them a pretty good idea. The chances of getting water and how deep the water is going to be and what the cost is going to be, just depending on where in Flagstaff. If you're talking about the Happy Jack area and specifically, most of those wells are 600 feet deep. You're going to be in about the $35,000 to $40,000 range to drill and equip a well down in that area. But there's good water down there. So if you go down 600 feet, you're almost guaranteed to get good water. So.
Great.
Yeah.
And a good question here is, what is your opinion of how large Flagstaff can grow with its current water supply or future water supply?
You have to ask the politicians about that one. Yeah. So I think eventually what's going to happen, and this is just my opinion and looking at stuff and being up here for a while, eventually the city's going to have to go east of town. They bought that Red Gap Ranch and they're eventually going to have to go east and start drilling wells out that way and pumping that water into town because they have maxed out all the well fields in the Flagstaff area. The Lake Mary well field, I'm drawing a blank now, but and they drilled one down by Fort Tuthill. So I mean, they're pretty much maxed out in the Flagstaff area. So there's a ton of water east of town. It's a huge aquifer. There's a lot of water out there. I think it's just an issue of getting it pumped from out there into town. So, I mean, I think that eventually that's going to happen. It's just going to be a matter of when the money when it becomes a money issue. I mean, there's a lot of water available east of town. That's just the direction they're going to have to go and figure out a way to pump it in. So,
do you feel comfortable people living here in the next 20 to 30 years that our well supply, water supply will be sufficient in areas already? It sounds like Fort Valley area, because of that constant runoff, should be okay. Is that a better?
Yeah. And
location?
I mean, really, the fact is, as you guys know, probably better than I do, we're almost built out as far as land. Like there's a few lots that come available in Fort Valley, and people buy them. We're drilling wells, but I mean, you're not going to see 100 more wells going in at Fort Valley because there's just no land.
We got you on mute again there, David.
So the places where there are water that's already established, I think that it will be fine for the next 20 years with the water supply. As long as we don't have some kind of major drought issue, that should be fine, the wells that we have.
Well, that seems to be predicted, so that's a little concerning as far as
Yeah,
things
exactly.
getting hotter and drier, more droughts.
Yeah, and if it does continue to get hotter and drier and more droughts, then it might be an issue with some of these shallow wells not producing.
Okay. Crystal Stevens asked, how much do well inspections cost? And I know you said it's an additional $250, I think, for FHA or VA, because
so the basic well test is $300, and that includes the water sample. So for $300, we come out, we measure the water levels in the well, we check the production rate, we check all the equipment to make sure it's all in working condition, and we take the water sample. So that's $300. If there's additional travel time, like when we go out to parks, just because of the additional travel time, it could be $350 to $400. For a conventional loan. If you have an FHA or a VA, then you need to plan on about another $250 for the additional sampling that's required for the FHA and the VA loans. And also, just so you guys know, we also go to the Williams area. There's a lot of tanks north of Williams. It's a haul water situation, but a lot of times the finance company wants somebody to go out and verify that the tank is functional, that the pump is functional, and take a water sample on those before they finance. So you can call us to go out and do that. Also, if you have any tanks on a haul water situation that has to be tested, we can do that too.
Awesome. And how much is that?
This is the same, just because of the travel time and everything, it's still $300 to go out and do that. Yeah.
Okay.
So a normal well, conventional loan in the Flagstaff area, 300. Mountain parks, it could be up to 400 plus. If it's an FHA or VA, the additional sampling costs.
In Williams, closer to 5 due to distance?
Yeah, exactly. Closer to 5 because of the travel time.
Great. Okay.
That's our travel time.
How about, is electricity required to pump? I'm assuming maybe connected to the grid, or does it not need to be connected? Because her question is specifically for off-the-grid wells.
Yeah, so off-the-grid wells, we can set them up 2 ways. We do have a line of solar pumps that we can pump almost down to 600 feet with the solar pump, which is kind of set up where it has its own dedicated panels. And if the sun is shining, then the pump will pump water. We can also do generators, where they can run a generator to pump the well. And we also do have a line of pumps that will run off of a house solar system. They work well with solar systems, I put it that way, because of the design of the motor. They're a soft start motor, so you don't get the big rush of power that usually knocks out the solar system. So we do have other pumps that will work with a standard house solar system if they have that. If not, we have dedicated solar systems just for the well pump, or we can set it up where they can run it off a generator.
Great, thank you. Helen asked, if you're in the area of mining, for example, uranium, et cetera, is there the possibility of contamination?
Not in the Flagstaff area. There's nothing in the Flagstaff area. The only place you're going to run into something like that is maybe up on the reservation by the uranium mines, and especially the tailings. It's not so much the mines, but the tailing piles that they have issues with. But that would be a special situation, not in Flagstaff or anywhere near Flagstaff. We don't have issues with that at all.
That's great. That's good to know. Thank you.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right. And Michelle says, not just drilling a well, but what should a buyer be asking about an existing well?
Well, definitely we would want to test an existing well to make sure it's producing enough water. And so the issue that comes up is on a marginal well, like how much is enough to run a house off of? And I tell people, average household with 4 people is going to use about 200 gallons a day. So if the well will produce more than 200 gallons a day, and you have a big enough storage tank, at least 2,500 gallons, you're not going to have problems running your house. You're not going to be able to put in an irrigation system and water grass and water plants. The well just won't put enough water to do that. So if it's an existing well and the well only makes, half a gallon a minute, a gallon a minute, you're not going to have enough water to, especially not irrigate a lawn with, but even a drip system with just some plants and stuff. You have to be careful with your usage or you'll use too much water for that. So a normal household, if you get 200 gallons or more, then you're going to be able to sustain your house with that.
Okay. And I would think, especially when you have horses, that's also a concern.
Yeah, but from what I talk to, most people I talk to with horses, I don't think they use more than 50 gallons a day for a horse. So, even if you have, horses, normally that's not an issue. As long as you don't forget to turn the hose off when you're filling the water trough. That seems to be the biggest issue I have. Is people's kids will go out and turn on the faucet to fill the water trough, and then they forget, and then they call me the next day and they don't have any water. So
it's always the kid's fault. That's the way it works in my house.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Okay, great. And then Michael Dugan asks, do all wells need to be registered with the state?
Yes, they do. And if it isn't already registered, if you can't find the registration, you can just contact it's the Arizona Department of Water Resources is who takes care of that. And you can just fill out a registration ownership form and they'll register it. But yeah, if it's not registered, you should go ahead, and that's to protect their water rights, is to go ahead and register it. Because they'll want that. They'll want to do that. If it's not already registered or they can't find the registration, then Arizona Department of Water Resources will help them get through that process.
Great. That's helpful to know.
Yeah, and also one other thing that we run into a lot is, when you're filling out your especially the disclosures, there's going to be a well registration number that you need to fill out for all that stuff. And I do not have access to that. So what I usually recommend is they contact Arizona Department of Water Resources and have them help locate that registration number.
It's usually based on the APN number, correct? As far as identifying, they're tied together.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So
that's a common question.
Any difficulty finding that, just contact ADWR directly and have them help you relocate that registration number.
Sweet.
If you
All right.
And I'll tell you this, there is an interactive map on ADWR's website. So you can go to their map and you can zoom in on the property. And a lot of times you can pick out the well off of that map and get the registration number from it, but not always. And the problem is that's all self-reported information. So if the owner didn't report the location properly, then you won't find it on the map, or you'll find a different well on your property. So that's not always the best way to do it. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but you can use the map and give that a try to locate stuff.
Right. Those are some great questions, everybody. Awesome. Hopefully we clarified quite a bit of that. I've got kind of an off question as well with that, but I had a client that also utilized a rainwater catchment system. And so I'm thinking that as we continue to not necessarily be as confident with what our water resources are going to be right here, are you already implementing some of that, or is there any advice or information?
We've definitely put in quite a few rainwater catchment systems. And basically the deal with that is you just have to have a really big tank to catch as much of the rainwater as you can and then store it for use. Normally we recommend at least a 10,000 gallon tank for catching rainwater. But yeah, we've set quite a few of those up in Flagstaff, and we can do those too.
How do they
Yeah.
compare to underground water as far as quality of the water as well as a surplus and supply?
So the people that have enough storage, that have, at least 10,000 gallons that I've talked to, do not have to haul water. Or if they do, it's just to supplement a little bit in the summertime. And the quality is good because it's rainwater. And whenever we do that, we always put
Oh, you're muted there.
With a rainwater catchment system. So
can you repeat that? You went onto mute.
Yeah, so we always install. So whenever we do the rainwater catchment, we always install the filtration and UV sterilizers with that, because you have to treat the rainwater before you can use it. So.
And you might have said this and it was muted, but I was told also that rainwater is much cleaner. Groundwater, you've got prescription drugs, all kinds of stuff in the water, whereas it's much softer rainwater and cleaner in general. Is that true?
Yeah, it's definitely softer. So that is one issue that we have in Flagstaff is our groundwater is hard water. So you're going to get a lot of hard water deposits and hard water issues with the groundwater, whereas with rainwater, it's obviously soft. You're not going to have those issues. Fortunately, in Flagstaff, we don't have any issues with groundwater contamination from any, prescription drugs, any of that stuff, because we just don't have a source for that in Flagstaff. So our groundwater is actually really high quality water. The problem you have with the rainwater is it falls on a roof, which is covered with bird poop, dead bugs, pine needles, all the bacteria, all that stuff, and then it all gets washed into the tank. So you've got to treat that. And of course, the biggest thing I always try to emphasize with groundwater or with rainwater catchment is you want to filter as much as possible before it gets into the tank. So you want to make sure your gutters are clean and you put gutter guards on. We've got filter systems on the downspouts before it goes into the collection system. And then we put a basket filter in front of the tank before it gets into the tank to catch anything, pine needles, dead bugs, all that stuff, so it doesn't go into the tank. Because once any of that stuff that gets washed into the tank then becomes organic material that starts breaking down, and then you have a septic tank instead of a water tank. So the important thing with rainwater catchment is you got to filter that as much as possible before it gets to the tank.
You can actually get quite a bit. I mean, condensation even from the night and the morning, as far as the catchment that you can actually get. I was surprised. We had a 5,000 tank in our old property we used just to irrigate our entire landscape, and we had more water than we can use. Do you see that as far? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. There's, like I said, I have a lot of customers that have a 10,000 gallon tank, and they rarely, if ever, have to haul water. I mean, they get enough water, obviously, because we get the monsoons around July, so that fills everything up, and then the snow starts falling in October, November, so that fills everything up. So yeah, normally if you have at least 10,000 gallons for your household use, you don't have to haul water.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. That was so informative. We really appreciated it. Thanks for jumping off the field with us. And sorry about the gap in communication there, but we got you.
And then I'm glad we were able to, and I appreciate being able to sit in front of you guys and get out some information and get out our contacts. You can call us any questions, call me. And then absolutely any well tests, any customers that are looking at drilling wells, we can help with all that.
So are you seeing a lot of requests or a lot of people looking, are we seeing some development?
Yeah, we probably get 3 requests a day for people wanting information on wells up here.
As far as requests to drill and requests to like inspections, are you getting quite a few of those?
Yeah, both. It's still just a ton of activity going on with the wells. I mean, you guys know better than I do with the housing market right now and the activity that's going on. There's just a lot going on. So.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Well, everybody, in the chat box, you'll find David Stevens' contact information, not to be confused with the David Stevens that works at Realty Executives, I believe. So I bet you get some of that.
Oh, yeah, I get calls from him all the time. And the worst part about it is I'll get a call from someone and they'll say, hey, did you send over that form? I've been looking for this and that. And the first thing I think is I forgot to send something over, and they're waiting on something from me, and I don't know what the heck they're talking about. And then I figured out finally, say, oh, you want the realtor David Stevens, huh? Not the pump guy.
Yeah. So make that distinction there. And then also for Arizona Department of Water Resources, there's the number and there is the link directly for that. And don't forget that well disclosure that you need to have your sellers fill out as well. And then with the addendum for the residential contract. So unless there is any other questions, which I do not see any here, did anybody else want to say anything? Feel free to take your mute off your mic and ask David. You've got him. He's all yours. 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, there was your 5-minute chance of opportunity. It looks like we answered everything. So if you guys think of anything else as you begin to think about what we went over today, feel free to give David a call. David, thanks again so much for being here as part of our Lunch and Learn series. And for next week, we're going to have, forget her last name, Nina. She teaches green MLS so that we can understand, and it might help with some of this well information as well too. It might coincide with that, but understanding the green MLS, green features in our house to be better educated with that. We're going to have that next week, 12 to 1:30 Tuesday, our Lunch and Learn series. So thank you all for being here. David, thanks again so much, and y'all have a wonderful week ahead, and we'll see y'all soon. Bye-bye. Thanks.